Good morning, and thank you all for joining us today. I am pleased to be here today with my colleague, Minister Bethlenfalvy, to present the 2020-21 public accounts for the province of Ontario. Each year, the government releases this key financial document to give the people of Ontario a clear, honest, transparent view into how their tax dollars were managed. I am pleased to report that for the fourth year in a row, our government has received an unqualified or clean audit opinion from the Auditor General. This is another testament to our commitment to restoring transparency and accountability in the province's finances. As the Premier has made clear, we will not spare any expense when it comes to protecting the health and safety of the people of Ontario. And since the onset of the pandemic, we have continued to fulfill that commitment, making historic and unprecedented investments in all sectors, especially priority areas like healthcare and education. The public accounts is proof of our unwavering commitment to the people of Ontario, because, as they show, government program spending totaled $169 billion in 2020-21. This is an increase of $16.7 billion compared to 2019 and 2020. That is unequivocally the single largest year-over-year expenditure on the province's spending record in its history. These investments represent real and measurable results for the people of Ontario. For example, more than $3 billion in urgent and unprecedented support to over 110,000 small businesses when they needed it the most, and required it due to restrictions imposed through public health measures. $3 billion to support over 444 municipalities and 110 transit systems across the province to ensure that people, including our frontline workers, had safe and reliable transit service. $1.5 billion to support Ontario's 627 long-term care homes, including funding for infection prevention, containment measures, staffing supports, and PPE. $879 million to support the province's COVID-19 testing and contact tracing strategy. And more than $703 million to add over 3,100 hospital beds to our system, creating capacity and allowing us to be ready to respond to any scenario. We made these investments because it was the right thing to do, and because I know that this is what the people of Ontario want most. Whether it's ensuring that our hospitals and frontline healthcare heroes have the bed and capacity they need to keep our communities safe, that our long-term care homes have the staff and resources required to provide the best possible care for our seniors, or that students, parents, and educators are supported and protected through the safe reopening of schools. I know that Ontarians expect us to make available every single resource necessary to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. And that's exactly what we will continue to do. As is the case in many other jurisdictions in Canada and across the world, the significant uncertainty caused by the pandemic has made financial planning more difficult than ever before. And that's why, since day one, we have built flexibility into our plans, ensuring that we are always positioned to respond to all situations. In the case of the public accounts, we were presenting a financial document for the year that ended on March 31st, 2021. And we know that the third wave peaked in late spring and receded this past summer. Therefore, much of the planned spending to address the third wave of the pandemic will now show up in the financial documents for 2021-22. While the public accounts show us how far we've come, we know that our work is not yet done, and that the pandemic is not yet behind us. As we continue to battle COVID-19, we will never hesitate in leveraging the province's full fiscal firepower to support the people and businesses of our province. With that, I will now like to invite Minister Bethlenfalvy to say a few words.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Minister Sarkaria, for that overview of Ontario's 2021 public accounts for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2021. And thank you for your tireless efforts as President of the Treasury Board. As Minister Sarkaria indicated, the public accounts are an annual release that details the government's fiscal position at the end of the year, which was March 31st, 2021, laying out how the province's actual revenue, expenses, and other key figures line up against our budget. This report, in answering your questions, is part of our government's commitment to fiscal transparency and accountability. As I've said before, transparency and accountability in our government has not wavered during COVID-19. Even through financial and economic forecasting has been more challenging than ever. Comme je l'ai déjà dit, notre gouvernement continuait
Like I said before, our government continued to stay transparent and accountable, even during the situation with COVID-19 pandemic. It was more difficult this year to estimate financial expenses. In March 2020, Ontario
fiscal jurisdiction in Canada to release a fiscal plan that reflected the potential impacts of COVID-19. 8 months later, we published the 2020 Ontario budget, which included significant additional investments to protect people and jobs. And our government has not missed a single quarterly financial update since being elected. So today's update is just one more opportunity for our government to ensure the people of Ontario have access to regular and timely information about the state of the province's finances. Ainsi, la mise à jour d'aujourd'hui constitue pour notre gouvernement
today's
une
update
occasion de plus de
is
faire
big
en
news
sorte
for
que
our
la
government.
population
It
de
is a way
l'Ontario
for us to
ait
make
accès
sure the
régulièrement
Ontarians,
et en temps
the Ontarian population
opportun
have
à des
access to
renseignements
our
sur les
regulations
finances
and
de la
information
province.
regarding financial
The public
statements
accounts
of the
also
province.
underscored the unprecedented challenges COVID-19 has posed in terms of forecasting economic growth and the pandemic's impacts on government revenues and expenditures. Now, as the President of the Treasury Board has said, this release clearly shows our government's record investments. The public account reveals the largest year-over-year increase in spending on record. These record investments delivered our commitment to protect people's health and the economy throughout the pandemic and our response to the virus. But as Minister of Finance and as the previous Treasury Board President, I have to put it simply and say how much it allows us to show the extent to which the 2021 fiscal year was a period like no other. Private sector forecasters and jurisdictions around the world have been challenged in laying out accurate financial planning assumptions that keep pace with the dynamic nature of the pandemic. But now we have certainty for 2020-21. The deficit figure for the last year is now $16.4 billion. In large part, the change from previous projections is driven by higher than anticipated revenues. And these figures were influenced by the overwhelming COVID-19 supports provided by all levels of government, which meant that even during a COVID-induced recession, government investments in jobs and the economy resulted in unprecedented increases in personal and corporate income tax. And I can say with confidence that our government will continue delivering on our number one priority of supporting people and jobs, as well as our commitment to plan responsibly, to bring forward regular, transparent updates that give Ontario's people and businesses the latest available information, and to continue to make available the necessary resources to protect people and incomes so that a lack of resources will never be an obstacle in the province's response to COVID-19. I look forward to joining you again on or before November 15th, when our government will bring forward our 2021 economic outlook and fiscal review, And with that, I'll turn the podium back to my colleague, Prabmeet Sakaria, and we'd be happy to take a few questions. Thank you.
Thank you, ministers. We'll now go to the phone line. One question and one follow-up, please. Go ahead.
A reminder to press star 1 if you have questions. First question is from Mike Crawley at CBC.
Hi, ministers. You're saying that program spending was $5.6 billion less than what was projected in the 2020 budget, and your main explanation for that is because the third wave didn't peak until later than anticipated. Doesn't that mean you should have spent that money ahead of time to help do some things to prevent that third wave from actually happening?
Mike, and thank you for that question. Our government made a commitment to the people of Ontario to ensure that we would protect them during this pandemic. And what we see before us today here through these public accounts is that we made $19.1 billion of investments to get us through the pandemic. We have over 16, the largest year-over-year increase in program spending on record for the province, the largest ever in our history. But it's due to absolutely investing in healthcare, investing in the education sector, investing, in our small businesses, over $3 billion, or our municipalities to keep them afloat and their transit systems afloat as well. So we have come here to, as part of our commitment to transparency and accountability to assure the people of this province that we will continue to do whatever it takes to get through this. Our job is to ensure that there are enough resources available for the province to be able to respond. There are some programs where we saw a decrease in demand just given the nature of the last years as it was a pandemic and COVID as well. So our commitment continues to be to invest significantly to get through this pandemic, and we see that right here through the public accounts. Over $16.7 billion year-over-year increase in spending, the highest on record. $19.1 billion spent on COVID to protect our hospital systems, to protect our seniors, to keep our children safe, and we'll continue to do whatever it takes to get through this because we know the fight against the pandemic is still not over, and that's why we'll continue to urge and work with all of our partners across the province to get through this.
Follow-up?
With respect, Minister, I don't feel you answered my question, so could I direct this at Minister Bethlenfalvy, please? The news release that the government put out says expenses were $5.6 billion less than what was forecast in the budget, and I'm quoting here, broadly, this is because the third wave of COVID-19 in Ontario peaked later than anticipated. The Premier said over and over and over again that the government would spare no expense. So if you were anticipating a third wave to peak, why didn't you get that money spent earlier on some of the things that could prevent a third wave from happening?
Well, those investments were made, Mike. Clearly, as Minister Sakari is pointing out, as the public account figures show, the extraordinary amount of resources were allocated and spent in the fiscal year, and it's very clear that whether it was for hospitals or was for public health, for testing, the vaccine rollout, for our staff, for the municipalities, the money was there, and really our job, put it in different terms, our job is to make sure that there's enough water in the fire trucks as they deal with the many fires that you have to deal with in a pandemic. And our job is to make sure there's enough water in the fire truck. If there's some water left over because the demand was lower or the pandemic does not respect our fiscal year end. It doesn't just end on March 31st. It continues into April. And it does not respect our accounting. What we need to respect is that COVID-19 is still with us. And that's why in the first quarter of this year, I put in an additional $2.2 billion on top of the $6.7 billion into the COVID one-time relief fund to make sure that there's ample water for our ministers and our Premier to allocate those funds, to spend those funds as they see fit. So that's the core message. And I will say this as well, not only ample resources, we're out here every 90 days, we've got a clean opinion. The people of Ontario should know that the Auditor General has looked at the books and these are the numbers. My message today is fundamentally the way to beat this pandemic is to those who have not gotten their vaccine yet, go get vaccinated so that we can keep our children in school, that we can keep our businesses open and open them more, so we can keep the pressure off our healthcare system. Many who've worked tirelessly for the last 18 months, that's the surest way, not accounting, not respecting a year-end, getting vaccinated.
Next question.
From Mathieu Simard, Radio-Canada.
Oh, hi. My question is for Peter.
Hello, my question is for Peter. The public question, the public funding that were informed at the federal level, did not allow for certain things. Can you please provide some further details on how this dynamic took place in the province? Reply. Thank you for your question. As you know, from the beginning of the pandemic, our government didn't keep any money. We invested everything that had to be invested to fight against the pandemic. This morning's public accounts can show you that we have invested enough money to face the pandemic, and I'm sure, and I can assure you that we will make the most efforts to keep up with this effort. Question. But I'm asking, actually, pouvez-vous continuer à faire
ici aujourd'hui pour parler avec des chiffres et continuer la tâche contre la
We're going to continue to work towards fighting the pandemic.
Contre COVID-19 n'a pas encore été terminé.
We know that the fight against COVID-19 is not over yet. A few days ago,
le 15 novembre, que je vais dire
in a few days, on November 15, I will give you few other numbers through the fall economic statement. So on November 15, I'll be able to tell you more about this topic. But right now, as of today, our target is to fight the pandemic. And with my colleague, Minister Zakaria, we'll continue to fight the pandemic with all of other colleagues.
From Richard Southern at 680 News.
Hi, good morning. For the finance minister, sir, you said you had a plan to make sure you had enough water in the fire truck, and I would suggest to you, you did. You budgeted to have that $5.6 billion there, but you did not spend that. What would you say to the Ontarians today who are looking at this and are saying, boy, that $5+ billion could have been spent to make classrooms smaller, to shore up hospitals for the third wave, to buy more N95 masks? What would you say to those Ontarians, sir?
I would say they had ample resources, and those funds were dispersed for just that reason. So the hospitals received their funding, and we made sure hospitals got timely funds with regard to the municipalities for public health, for transit, for operating, for social services. We provided over $4 billion of support for education. The increase year over year is over $1 billion. And as my colleague Prabmeet Sarkaria mentioned, that over $19 billion was spent on COVID relief. There were ample resources available, and that money, as necessary, was spent. And we'll continue that. We're not going to stop, Richard, on March 31st that we're talking about. April 1st, we're making sure, and we've made sure in my budget in March for this fiscal year coming up, when we're almost 6 months into this fiscal year, that we continue to have ample resources there. And you can see in the Auditor General's report the quantum of money that we provided for our healthcare system, the quantum for our education system, an extraordinary amount of financial firepower. And I would say this, every province is dealing with a lot of uncertainty and volatility in the numbers. our numbers came out different than projected, but other provinces, like the province of British Columbia, had an even greater disparity between their projected numbers and their actual numbers. And other provinces right across the country. And why is that? We're in unprecedented times. One thing is certain, that we'll make sure that we have ample resources, financial resources, so that everyone can do their job in each ministry and they can protect the people, protect jobs, and we'll continue that activity.
Yeah, thank you, Minister. I do know that 2021 was the largest spending on record. That's certainly not going unrecognized here. But $900 million was spent on education than what was laid out. I know parents feel that could have been used to make classrooms smaller. Can you address that? And can the President of the Treasury Board, for the first time, address that FAO report last week that found that none of the $2.7 billion in COVID response was paid? The FAO told me no money came out of government coffers for that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. And listen, I'll take the second part of that first. I'll answer the first part second, and then I'm going to hand it over to my colleague. I want to be very clear. The FAO's report, the Financial Accountability Officer, we always thank him and his team for the good work that they do, the important work that they do, but recognizing that's a point in time. And the $2.7 billion you're referring to is part of the $6.7 billion COVID one-time relief fund, and that is for the full year. And we will continue to provide, and I increased it, in fact, in Q1, because not only were we past the third wave, but we're dealing with the fourth wave. So the message is very clear. There's ample resources. We'll continue to provide ample resources because the job isn't done. We're in very volatile and uncertain times. And by the way, we're having this conversation because we did put out a budget. We were the first to put out an economic statement in March of 2020. First province in Canada to do that in the pandemic. We put out a budget in November. And if you recall, the federal government did not put out a budget for over 2 years. So you wouldn't be having the conversation with the federal government because they never put out their numbers. We put out our numbers, and we'll continue to put out those numbers and be in front of you every 90 days to have that conversation about how we spent the money and what we've allocated. So we're very forthright with the people of Ontario, with a clean opinion from the Auditor General, which has not always been the case from previous governments on the books of the government. With regard to education, the $1.1 billion increase year over year is a big increase. On top of that, our Minister of Education, Stephen Lecce, who's doing a remarkable job in a challenging time to keep our kids safe, and that's his number one priority. It's the Premier's number one priority, and it's all of our priorities to keep our children and the people of Ontario safe. We recently spent $600 million on ventilation systems, HEPA filters, and making sure that each school has the proper, not only ventilation systems, but masks and PPE, the cleaning of the schools, because we want to keep our kids in school. That's where they should be. And that's what we're going to spare no effort to make sure that that happens. And I'll pass it over to Pradmeet.
No, thank you very much, Minister Bethlenfalvy. And just to add on to that, which I think it did a great job of explaining the investments that we have made into education during this time, over $2.9 billion into the education sector for that reason, to ensure that we had a safe return to classrooms, that we had the ample, efficient cleaning supplies in our schools. And Mr. Lecce has done a great job of that. In the post-secondary sector, which is, I believe, what is being referred to with the $900 million of underspend is due to lower, sometimes expenses within the college programs, as well as some of the federal programs that were put forward, and provincial supports that were given, and saw a lower demand into that post-secondary education expense. But as Minister Bethlenfalvy said, we had a $1.1 billion increase on the education file, and that's our commitment to ensuring that we keep children safe, we keep our classrooms safe, and we'll continue to do that. We'll continue to invest, as Minister Lecce has done an incredible job of this year, during this school year, in our children. And then also, just to address the point of the FAO, and as my colleague said, it is a snapshot and a point of time report. Minister Bethlenfalvy was, here just last month, increasing our commitment and funding to battle the pandemic that we have before us with an increase of over $2 billion to our fund, but also recognizing that the FAO reports doesn't take into consideration the consolidated entities and the transfers that have been made to whether it be our hospitals, school boards, and some of our other agencies. So we'll continue to work with all of our partners across the province to ensure that we get through this pandemic and that we continue to work together collectively to keep Ontarians safe.
Thank you. And this next question will be the last question.
From Holly Mackenzie-Suter at Canadian Press.
Hi, I have a question about an Auditor General report from earlier in the year that flagged the issue of pandemic funding that wasn't being properly tracked in terms of where and when it was being spent. So I just wanted to ask the Finance Minister what's being done this year to kind of take the recommendations about that issue into account and kind of improve record keeping on these pandemic spending programs.
Well, thank you, Holly. First off, I always thank the Auditor General for her work and her team. Not only do they look at the books, and they've given another clean opinion today. This is my fourth time through public accounts, and up here for the second time, or maybe even the third time since our government on the public accounts. So thank you for that. You're going back to some of the value for money audits that the Auditor General does as well. In terms of the specifics of that, I'd refer you to the Minister of Health. But what I can tell you is we always appreciate another set of eyes on how we spend money. I spent my career in the private sector, and one of the things that is important in the private sector is you constantly learn. You try to do better, and of course that's a principle that applies in the public sector, in government as well. And so that's point number one. Point number two is you have to recognize we're also dealing with an unprecedented time where we're having to do many things simultaneously, and so sometimes you can do things a little bit better, of course. But the fundamental thing is we are doing things. We are protecting people's health. We are protecting their jobs. This pandemic is not defeated. The job is not done. The fourth wave, and I think collectively, as the Premier always does, a big shout out to all Ontarians and the many Ontarians who have worked together to beat COVID-19. It's had devastating effects not only here in Ontario but across the globe. But we are working together. We will beat it. But the job's not done. So the message really is to all Ontarians, if you haven't got your vaccine, please get your vaccine. We're going into the communities. We've got mobile buses. There's a lot of education. We'll continue to focus on that because, among other things, that is one of the surest ways to keep our kids in school, as I mentioned before, which I think most parents want that. Opening our businesses even more, and we've made good progress, but there's more to do, and we sure don't want to put pressure on our healthcare system. And as you can see, we put on our masks every time we walk away from the podium. Keep following the protocols. Keep distancing where possible, because this pandemic, it's been a tough 18 months, and we're on Delta, so that's the fourth variant. There could be other variants of concern. We can't let our guard down. We're doing okay, but we can do more in the vaccination rates, and Dr. Moore will be talking with you later today with more information. So I would just say, if you haven't got vaccinated, please get vaccinated.
Follow-up, Holly?
Yeah, I guess a follow-up on a slightly different topic. I just noticed the deficit is lower than expected, partly because of these pandemic supports for people and businesses. So I'm just wondering if there were other areas where you saw kind of a positive impact from those programs.
Well, I think that, what's important is that you try to pull out all the stops. So, providing, for example, in the budget in March of 2021 that I laid out this year, we put more money to help people with the job training tax credit. Many people are changing their careers. They want to upskill and reskill and retrain, so we provided help in that regard. We've increased the child care tax credit. So many people have been obviously been impacted by the pandemic families, so doubling the child care tax credit in this province. As another initiative, we provided the small business grant to over 100,000 businesses. Small businesses have really taken it on the chin, and we continue to support them, and I see many in the community support them, and it takes all of us. So there are many things in the public accounts that we just filed. But we're not resting. We're going to continue working 24/7 with many counterparts. Our federal government. Congratulations, Prime Minister Trudeau, and on your re-election. And we'll work collaboratively and closely with the Prime Minister and his colleagues on beating this pandemic. Whether it's helping us with the incredible investments we've made in this province for long-term care, both in terms of capacity, staffing, and we'll continue to make those investments. In my riding, for example, 7 years before we got elected, there were 0 long-term care new beds put into an area where the wait list is very long. So we have a lot more work to do. The job's not done, and we won't waver from that job.
Great. Thank you, Minister.
So thank you very much, everyone, and have a great day.